Hello and welcome to RPG PhD, where we discuss the art and science of tabletop role-playing games. I'm Dr. Ben, and today we're talking about the art of negative space. Tabletop role-playing games thrive on the creativity and imagination of their participants. While many games provide detailed rules and expansive lore, an often underappreciated design principle is the use of negative space and implied design. Intentional gaps in rules, narrative, or world building that invite players and game masters to fill in the blanks. Much like how a painting's empty background can emphasize its subject, a game's deliberate omissions can empower players to shape the experience. In this video, we explore how ambiguous rules, open-ended mechanics, and minimalist lore in tabletop role-playing games encourage player creativity, improvisation, and emergent storytelling. We will see why sometimes the most powerful game master or designer is a quiet one who lets negative space do the work. In art and design, negative space refers to the empty or undefined areas that surround the main subject. These empty spaces serve to highlight the focus and engage the viewer's imagination. An analogous concept exists in storytelling and game design. By leaving things out, creators draw attention to what remains and invite the audience to participate in its completion. Literary theorists have noted that narratives contain gaps or blanks that readers must fill in with their own imagination, leading to a more active and personal experience of the story. These gaps are the unwritten portion of the text that calls for the reader's participation, and different readers will fill those blanks in different ways, creating inexhaustible realizations of the story. In other words, what is not said by the author can be as important as what is said because it spurs the audience's creative involvement. This principle directly applies to tabletop role-playing games, which are essentially collaborative storytelling games. Every rulebook or adventure module is incomplete by nature. No game text can anticipate every action players will attempt or every detail they might wonder about in the fictional world. Instead of trying to cover every possibility, many game designers embrace incompleteness as a feature. By designing with negative space, leaving certain rules ambiguous, outcomes open-ended, or setting details sketchy, designers and game masters encourage players to exercise agency and imagination. The players become co-authors of the experience, filling the intentional voids with their own ideas. As one philosophical analogy puts it, we shape clay into a pot, but it is the emptiness inside that holds whatever we want. The usefulness of a vessel comes from the empty space it encloses. Likewise, the richness of a tabletop role-playing game narrative often comes from the undefined spaces that players and game masters fill with whatever ideas or content matter to them. Notably, this negative space is not just an absence of content, it is a purposeful design decision that can heighten engagement. One game writer describes negative space as space without details or specifics that surrounds the focus of attention, which can actually give the focus greater substance when the audience subconsciously fills in that emptiness. In a role-playing context, the focus might be key plot points, characters, or themes that the game provides, while the negative space is everything left open to interpretation. By selectively detailing only certain layers of information and leaving other layers undefined, a game can provide a pyramid of detail. The top level, or the immediate essentials, is sharply defined, while lower levels are sketchier, meant to be fleshed out in player campaigns. This layered approach ensures that critical structure exists so the game has direction and form, but plenty of freedom remains for personalization. In the following sections, we will look at how this concept manifests in rules, mechanics, and world building, and how it fosters player freedom and emergent storytelling. One of the clearest ways negative space appears in tabletop role-playing games is through ambiguous or absent rules. places where the game's rules stop and the game master's or player's judgment begins. Early role-playing games operated heavily on this principle. The old school Renaissance OSR movement, which emulates the style of 1970s D&D, often cites the mantra rulings, not rules. As a quick primer for old school gaming explains, most of the time in old style gaming, you don't use a rule, you make a ruling. Players are encouraged to declare any action their imagination conjures without combing through a rule book to see if it's allowed. And the referee, the game master, uses common sense or a simple die roll to determine the outcome. The philosophy here is that a character's sheet's limited list of skills or powers should not confine player creativity. If a player wants their hero to attempt something unorthodox, they can just try it. The lack of a specific rule becomes an opportunity for invention rather than a roadblock. It has been noted that this is why old school characters have relatively few defined abilities. By deliberately not specifying every possible action's mechanics, early D&D gave players permission to think outside the rules and empowered game masters to improvise. D&D designers even leave certain mechanics open-ended on purpose. For example, the rules might say the outcome of X situation is up to the dungeon master, or simply provide a guideline and leave the particulars unspecified. Far from being a flaw, this ambiguity is often a feature that leads to memorable gameplay moments, born of group ingenuity. The OSR community takes this philosophy further by identifying implied rules, things that the game never states outright but are understood by everyone at the table through context and logic. For example, if a medieval fantasy equipment list includes flint and steel, there might be no written rule for how to start a campfire, yet all players assume their characters can light a fire with that tool. The game designers omit such minutiae, trusting the players to fill in these common sense actions. As one commentator explained, implied rules are the many unstated assumptions of a role-playing game that often go unexamined until an unusual situation emerges. These assumptions form a shared understanding, a creative contract where everyone agrees on basic truths of the game world without needing explicit statements. The benefit is that gameplay can flow faster and more naturally, focusing on interesting or dramatic uncertainties while glossing over the obvious. It also means that when a truly unusual situation does arise, the group isn't constrained by a convoluted rule. They can devise a ruling that fits the moment. In effect, every gap in the rules is an invitation to collaborate and invent. Ambiguity in this light is not a bug, but a fertile ground for improvisation. Players who might otherwise be funneled down a narrow path of predefined options are instead invited to try anything, with the understanding that the group will figure out a fair resolution. This dynamic can produce highly original solutions and outside-the-box thinking, the kind of creativity that only emerges when constraints are light. Deliberately rules-light systems exemplify this. Consider Merkborg, a modern indie RPG with old-school sensibilities. The game's rules are extremely streamlined. It doesn't sweat precise distances, movement rates, or many tactical specifics. As a review notes, Merkborg is extremely loosely derived from D&D or other OSR games. Any rules needed could be imported from any edition of D&D, if desired. In other words, Merkborg provides a skeletal framework for combat checks and leaves the rest to be determined by the group, either by on-the-fly rulings or by borrowing rules from elsewhere. The designers intentionally left blank space in the rulebook, signaling that they expect and empower players to customize. This open canvas approach, where the game text says, "We're not going to define this, what do you want?" can be incredibly freeing. It unshackles the group from constantly consulting rulebooks and instead pushes them to engage creatively with the scenario. Every unforeseen question, can I swing from the chandelier? How does alchemy work in this world? Becomes a chance for collaborative world building and spontaneous problem solving, rather than an exercise in index searching. While designing with negative space and implied elements fosters creativity, it is not without its pitfalls. Too much ambiguity or minimalism can overwhelm players, particularly those who are new to tabletop role playing games or who prefer clear structure and guidance. Without sufficient scaffolding, some players may experience choice paralysis, unsure what actions are possible or what the world expects of them. Likewise, uneven group expectations can lead to inconsistency or confusion. If one player imagines a grim, dark world while another envisions lighthearted fantasy, the resulting mismatch can disrupt the shared fiction. For game masters, this approach demands strong improvisational skills and a keen sense of pacing, as they must often fill in blanks on the fly without derailing coherence. In short, while implied design empowers player freedom, it also requires careful calibration. Too little structure can leave players lost, while too much openness can strain even experienced game masters. Beyond outright rule ambiguity, many tabletop role playing games employ open ended mechanics, structured yet flexible systems to foster creativity and emergent storytelling. These mechanics offer a framework for resolution but intentionally avoid scripting specific outcomes. Instead, promoting the group to interpret and elaborate in play. One excellent example is Coriolis, the Third Horizon, a science fiction game often described as Arabian Nights in space. In Coriolis, skill checks use a dice pool system with degrees of success rather than binary pass-fail outcomes. The game master and players are encouraged to interpret not just whether an action succeeds, but how cleanly it succeeds and what complications might arise. The game's prayer to the icons mechanic further deepens this openness. Players can pray to the icons, these are mystical figures representing archetypal forces, to re-roll dice, but invoking divine favor often carries narrative consequences determined collaboratively between players and the game master. Also, the game's approach to darkness points, tokens the game master can spend to introduce narrative twists or escalate tension, explicitly drives emergent storytelling. The game master is encouraged to spend these points creatively, improvising obstacles or dramatic shifts in response to player actions. As a result, Coriolis sessions often feel fluid and dynamic, with the narrative evolving through the player's choices and the game master's adaptive responses. Trophy Gold, a dark fantasy game about desperate treasure hunters, uses incursion frameworks, a series of evocative prompts rather than fully scripted encounters. Each set of prompts suggests imagery, tone, and potential dangers, but leaves the specifics entirely up to the game master and the players. A room might be described simply as a shrine choked with vines, something ancient stirring beneath. From there, it's up to the table to decide what that something is and how it reacts to the player's actions. Trophy's use of risk rolls also fosters creative outcomes. Players negotiate what they risk, what benefit they hope for, and what consequences might arise. An inherently collaborative, emergent process. No two groups will interpret a trophy incursion the same way. The narrative is shaped moment to moment by player choices and game master improvisation. Finally, Ironsworn, a game designed for solo, co-op, or guided play, offers another compelling model. Its oracle tables generate story prompts, names, and twists procedurally, and players are encouraged to interpret these results creatively. If an oracle suggests a new danger approaches, the player or group decides what that danger is based on the evolving fiction. The game's core progress tracks for vows, journeys, and fights abstract story beats rather than prescribed specific events. The details of what happens are determined in play. As a result, Ironsworn campaigns naturally evolve in unique personal directions shaped by player imagination and the randomness of the oracles. The system acts as a fertile field for emergent story rather than a predefined script. In all these examples, open-ended mechanics empower players and game masters alike to become co-authors of the narrative. The rules provide scaffolding, but within that structure, the story emerges collaboratively, shaped by creative interpretation, improvisation, and the unexpected. Such designs make every session a unique experience and ensure that the player's contributions genuinely matter to the evolving fiction. Open-ended mechanics like these transform the role of the game master as well. Instead of dictating a story, the game master becomes more of a facilitator and fellow player, reacting to the collective ideas at the table. The net effect of open-ended mechanics is a game that can surprise its own creators, because so much is determined in the moment by the group's ideas and the fall of the dice. The experience is never the same twice and often yields outcomes no module writer or rule designer could have foreseen. This is emergent gameplay and narrative at its finest, a true collaboration. In such games, player freedom isn't just a philosophical notion, but a structural element. The rules serve as prompts, the scaffolding around which the player's creative contributions crystallize into story. Another domain of tabletop role-playing game design where negative space plays a pivotal role is world building and lore. Some game designers provide only broad strokes of a setting, or none at all, relying on implied design to spark the group's creativity. An implied setting is the idea that a game's rules and tone hint at a world without exhaustively detailing it, leaving the table to extrapolate and invent the specifics. Many classic RPGs operated this way. The original edition of Dungeons & Dragons came with scant description of its world, yet by reading the classes, monsters, and equipment lists, one could infer quite a lot. A pseudo-medieval fantasy world with ruins full of treasure, lurking monsters, and a frontier where civilization is scarce. At first, Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson didn't outline the cosmology or politics of the world. They trusted that the game master would create things as they go, in what we now call emergent storytelling. The game gave you enough. Knights and wizards exist, there are dragons, gold coins, buy equipment, and expected you to fill in the rest. This not only lightened the rulebook, but it actively engaged each group in world building. Every D&D campaign in the 1970s was by necessity an exercise in collaborative myth-making. The negative space in the setting meant your table's version of the world was uniquely yours. The benefit of a minimalist or implied lore approach is that it avoids constraining the player's imagination. If a game text provides a very detailed setting with encyclopedic lore and canon, players often feel they must adhere to those facts. There's a fear of getting it wrong or being limited by what's written. In contrast, when a game only gives you evocative nuggets, it defines enough of its own and the table comes up with the rest. This is the golden spot referenced in a review of Bourke. The game's book is full of flavor, sinister omens, creepy illustrations, atmospheric hints of a dying world, but not enough lore for players to really get a deep understanding of the game's setting. It's the golden spot where the game master can make the setting very much their own, but there's enough ideas for them to get started. Bourke provides teasers. For example, it lists a calendar of 10 doomsday prophecies and strange cults, but it doesn't explain every city or government. The style and tone are clear. A dark, decaying realm full of misery and metal, yet the specifics are intentionally left vague. This invites the game master and players to answer questions like, what does the world look like beyond the one town described? What caused the apocalypse? The rulebook's silence on these matters isn't an oversight. It's negative space designed to be filled by the group's collective imagination. As a result, no two Bourke campaigns share the exact same world or story. The players have tremendous freedom to co-author the lore as they play. Other games follow similar strategies. Apocalypse World gives only sketchy details of its post-apocalyptic setting. There are references to a psychic maelstrom and scant resources, but what the apocalypse was or how society looks now is left to each gaming group to decide. Dungeon World, the fantasy powered by the apocalypse game, doesn't present a fully fleshed out world, map, or history. Instead, it relies on fantasy tropes and the aforementioned leave blanks approach to let each campaign world emerge through play. Fate Core is explicitly setting agnostic. It provides tools for groups to create their own settings collaboratively during Session 0. In fact, Fate's guidelines suggest that character creation and setting creation happen together, with players contributing ideas about the world as they describe their characters' backstories. The system thus bakes world building into play from the start, making the act of creating lore a shared and enjoyable part of the game rather than homework done by a game master alone. Even published modules and adventures can leverage implied design. A classic example is sandbox-style adventure modules. Take Dungeons & Dragons Keep on the Borderlands from 1979. It provides a home base, the Keep, a wilderness area, and the notorious Caves of Chaos filled with monsters. What it pointedly does not provide is a plotted story for why the characters are there or how events will unfold. The module is a toolkit of locations and enemies with only a thin contextual thread. Lawless frontier with encroaching monsters. The expectation is that players will decide their own objectives. Explore, fight monsters, maybe befriend or fight the Keep's NPCs, and thus create their own story. The lack of a predetermined narrative is the negative space which the group's actions will fill. Modern hexcrawl or open world adventures follow this tradition. They supply maps, encounter tables, and maybe a few story seeds, but no linear plot. This design gives players freedom to roam, to set their own goals, and to surprise the game master with unexpected directions. In other words, player-driven emergent narrative. A more recent example is the concept of the West Marches campaign, an entirely player-led exploratory campaign with no overarching plot, where the world is persistent, but what happens is driven by where the players choose to go. Such a campaign is all negative space in terms of story. The game master prepares an environment and reacting factions, but there is zero plot until the players make one through their actions. From a media studies perspective, this approach turns consumers into producers of content. It aligns with concepts of participatory culture where the audience, players, contribute to the text, the game's story, in a meaningful way. In tabletop role-playing games, the line between author and audience is blurred. The game designers provide a scaffold, but the actual narrative content is produced by the group in play. This can also enhance player investment. If you helped imagine a piece of the world or story, you care about it more deeply, theoretically. A knight who isn't from generic kingdom number 5, but from the very kingdom that you and your friends invented together in session 1, with its quirky customs and personal history, will feel far more meaningful. Implied design thus creates a fertile ground for what might be called emergent lore, the history, geography, and culture that come to life during play, distinct for every campaign. It's worth noting that negative space in lore should be balanced with enough guidance to inspire rather than totally confuse. The best minimalist settings hit that sweet spot that Bourke does, where there's enough ideas for game masters to get started if they aren't feeling creative, but plenty of room to depart from or expand on those ideas. Too much empty space can be as problematic as too little. If a game gave no sense of setting or genre, players might feel unmoored or overwhelmed by infinite possibilities. The key is implied design. Suggest evocative details that imply a larger world, then step back and let the table extrapolate. Good examples include Dungeon World's implied fantasy world, Trail of Cthulhu's approach of giving core Lovecraftian tentpoles but leaving many mysteries unsolved for the game master to personalize, Fiasco's use of a simple playset, a one-page list of possible characters and props to imply a setting for a completely improvised caper story. In all these cases, the provided elements act as creative prompts, and the negative space around them is where the magic happens. Throughout the above exploration, a common thread emerges: intentional uncertainty. By leaving aspects of the game uncertain, be it what a rule precisely dictates, what a character can do, what exists over the next hill, or what motive an NPC hides, designers and game masters hand freedom to the players to define those unknowns through play. This uncertainty fuels improvisation, which in turn leads to narratives that are organic and surprising. It also fosters a sense of genuine agency. When players know that the story isn't pre written and that their decisions and creative contributions directly shape the outcome, they feel a greater ownership of the game. From a philosophical standpoint, one might say this approach trusts in the collective creativity and wisdom of the group, a very pro player or even egalitarian ethos. It resonates with the idea that the value of a structure lies in the space it encloses, the space it opens for freedom. In game terms, the rules and written narrative are the structure, but the gaps within them, the undefined parts, are what allow players to exercise freedom and find meaning. Those gaps act as a pressure valve against the feeling of being railroaded. Few things kill creativity more than the sense that the game has only one correct path or that every outcome is preordained. Negative space in design counters that by always ensuring something remains unresolved or flexible, awaiting player input. It enshrines the concept of playing to find out, the notion that neither players nor the game master fully know what will happen until it happens in play. This mirrors real life in a satisfying way. Unplanned, serendipitous, and driven by the choices of individuals interacting with chance. Interdisciplinary research supports the benefits of this kind of open improvisational play. Studies in psychology and creativity, for instance, have observed that engaging in tabletop roleplay can enhance creative thinking skills. It's not hard to see why. A tabletop role-playing game that asks its participants to constantly imagine and contribute new ideas to solve problems or enrich the story is practically a gym for the creative muscles. Narrative theory also suggests that when people participate in making a story, they connect with it on a deeper level. One media scholar notes that in participatory storytelling in fandoms, that tabletop role-playing games have this element built in by design. The difference is that instead of writing fan fiction about someone else's world, players are writing the fan fiction of their own evolving campaign as they play. They are the fans and the authors simultaneously. The game designer in this scenario functions more like a curator or enabler, providing just enough material to spark imagination, but not so much as to stifle it. Of course, designing with negative space is a balancing act. It requires careful judgment about what to specify and what to leave open. Successful games in this vein tend to clearly communicate their premise or genre conventions, giving players a solid launching point and then open the field for elaboration. They also provide safety nets, guidelines for game masters on how to handle the unexpected, or principles, like those in Apocalypse World and Dungeon World, to ensure that improvised content stays coherent and true to the game's spirit. In other words, even the freedom has a framework. The paradox is that constraints can inspire creativity. A game sets some boundaries. This is a gritty post-apocalypse, and within those, the lack of further detail invites invention. If there were no boundaries at all, players might face choice paralysis. If boundaries are too tight, players feel railroaded. The art of implied design is finding that sweet middle ground. When it works, the result can be extraordinary. Player-driven campaigns have produced some of the hobby's most treasured anecdotes. Those you had to be there moments that no novelist could purposefully replicate because they hinge on player whim and lucky dice. These range from comedic mishaps, the kind that occur when players lateral think around an obstacle in a way the game master never anticipated, to dramatic character developments, when a player's offhand idea about their past becomes a linchpin of the entire campaign's plot. Such moments often arise directly from the negative space left in the game. The players see a gap or a mystery and pour their creativity into it, and something unique blossoms. As a brief illustration, consider a scenario in Apocalypse World. The game setting doesn't say who runs the only water well in town. It merely establishes that water is scarce. A curious player asks the MC who controls the water here. The MC, following principles, might turn the question back. Good question. Who do you think controls it? Perhaps your character would know from rumors. Now the player gets inventive. I bet it's that cult in the hills. They have the well and trade water for weird favors. Suddenly, a whole faction and plot thread just got created in collaboration out of an initially undefined bit of setting. The player feels clever, they added a cool element. The MC has new material to play with, and the narrative gains depth. A dangerous cult controlling water is ripe with story potential. The implied design, not specifying the detail, enabled greater player agency and a more personalized story. Game designers who wish to cultivate player freedom and emergent storytelling must be deliberate in how they structure negative space within their systems, settings, and adventures. Rather than leaving gaps by accident, they can purposefully employ techniques that invite player creativity and collaborative meaning making. So here are some design practices that exemplify this particular approach. First, designers can structure mechanics as prompts rather than scripts. Instead of prescribing a narrow list of possible outcomes for an action, rules can offer a flexible framework that encourages narrative interpretation. For example, a partial success result might be phrased as, "You succeeded but with a complication," to be determined collaboratively rather than assigning a fixed mechanical penalty. So instead of writing, "If you roll a 7 to 9, you lose 5 HP and fall prone," you write, "On a partial success, you achieve your goal but suffer a setback or complication." The game master and players can then describe what happens. This invites players and game masters to co-create outcomes that feel organically tied to the fiction of their particular session. Such mechanics position the rules as a scaffold, not a cage, enabling the story to evolve in unexpected directions. Second, designers can embrace the principle of draw maps, leave blanks in world building. Rather than fully detailing every region or faction, they can deliberately mark areas of the setting as unknown or in flux, accompanied by textual guidance, encouraging groups to collaboratively invent the details. For example, in a city sourcebook, provide a rough map and describe 3 to 4 major factions in detail, but leave entire districts labeled unmapped slums or abandoned noble houses. In the text, include guidance. Encourage your players to explore these unknown areas and help you invent what lies within. An unmapped district in a city, an unexplored sector of space, or a cryptic rumor about an ancient faction. These elements act as narrative gaps that players and game masters are empowered to fill during play. This approach fosters a sense of discovery and ownership as the player's contributions actively shape the world. Third, games can make use of descriptive tags or aspects as flexible narrative tools rather than exhaustive lists of codified powers. Character elements such as exiled noble or haunted by the past can serve as open-ended narrative handles, inviting players to invent relevant details in each new context. Such designs encourage dynamic improvisational play and allow for creative reinterpretation of character capabilities in response to evolving story needs. Fourth, designers can offer story seeds instead of fully scripted plots within adventure materials. Rather than specifying predetermined sequences of events, modules can provide evocative premises, rumors, and NPC motivations that serve as starting points for player-driven narratives. So, for example, instead of the players will find the lost jewel of Maru in Area D triggering the wrath of the Shadow Guild, rumors speak of a jewel cursed by an unknown entity hidden somewhere in the ancient ruins. How the players interact with this mystery and what consequences follow is up to them. A seed, such as a cursed jewel sought by rival factions, its true powers unknown, inherently invites player agency and game master improvisation. The resultant narrative emerges collaboratively rather than being imposed from above. Fifth, designers can present factions and NPCs with unresolved threads. Rather than defining every motive or backstory in exhaustive detail, they can include ambiguities and unanswered questions. For example, instead of the Red Hand are evil raiders attacking the kingdom, it can be the Red Hand claim they are avenging an ancient wrong, but only a few know the true history. What was that wrong? What internal tensions divide them? A faction described as divided by internal tensions, with its true purpose known only to a select few, creates a narrative space for players to uncover or even invent critical details through play. This ensures that players remain active participants in shaping the world's meaning. Finally, designers can adopt a style of evocative yet sparse description. When portraying a location, creature, or artifact, suggestive language that hints at deeper mysteries is often more engaging than exhaustive exposition. Describe an ancient obelisk as humming faintly, its symbol shifting when viewed from the corner of the eye. This sparks curiosity and encourages the group to collaboratively explore its significance. Don't explain what the obelisk does, let players investigate and invent. Such design consciously leverages negative space to invite player interpretation and agency. Designing with negative space is an intentional practice grounded in an understanding of how players engage with ambiguity. By constructing frameworks that invite creative participation, whether through open-ended mechanics, unexplored setting elements, or evocative narrative gaps, designers can foster an experience of co-authored storytelling, where each group's campaign becomes a unique and emergent work of play. In the world of tabletop RPGs, sometimes the most powerful game master is the one who speaks softly or not at all. The one who leaves room for the players to speak and for the story to echo in the gaps. Negative space and implied design are about fostering that room. The breathing space in rules, mechanics, and lore that transforms a game from a dictated experience into a creative playground. By embracing ambiguity in rules, games like classic D&D and Bourke allow players to attempt the extraordinary and solve problems in unorthodox ways. By providing open-ended mechanics, systems like Apocalypse World and Fate turn gameplay into a conversation where everyone at the table can add to the narrative in real time, yielding stories that surprise even their narrators. And by restraining the impulse to over-explain the setting, games that favor implied worlds give groups the freedom to create a mythology that feels uniquely theirs. Whether in the haunted ruins of an OSR sandbox or the sketchbook sci-fi of a collaborative Fate universe. The interdisciplinary lens from narrative gaps to useful emptiness reinforces a simple truth. Blank spaces invite participation. A melody would be monotone without the silent beats between notes. A story becomes personal when the audience's mind fills in the unspoken. A game becomes play in the richest sense when the players are given creative agency to shape the journey. Tabletop role-playing games, by their very nature, flourish when they harness this power of the unfinished and the uncertain. Game designers and game masters can take away from this the confidence that not detailing everything is not laziness or weakness, but often a sign of respect for the player's imaginative abilities. Likewise, players can come to such games not as consumers of content, but as collaborators, empowered to say yes and to the nascent ideas the game provides. In an age where some games offer exhaustive compendiums and scripted adventures, it's worth celebrating those that hold back, whispering instead of shouting. The quiet game master, whether an actual game master or the game's design itself, understands that what is omitted can be as important as what is included. By deftly balancing guidance with gaps, structure with silence, tabletop role-playing games can unlock a playground of player freedom where creativity thrives and every campaign becomes an undiscovered country. So that's the power of negative space and implied design in tabletop role-playing games. Sometimes what you don't say or define is exactly what sparks the player's creativity. And those unscripted collaborative moments, that's where the magic happens. I'd love to hear how you've used gaps in the rules or in the setting to create great stories at your table. Have you run a sandbox campaign, used a minimalist game, dropped in a mysterious detail and let the players run wild? Let me know in the comments. I try to read and respond to everyone. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to RPG PhD for more content on the art and science of role-playing games, and please share this video with your friends. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.